While goals are supposed to be a source of immense joy and maybe a lifetime memory, sometimes a goal can turn into a one-way ticket to your local graveyard. This is a story about these moments, and it's not an easy one to tell, let me tell you. One time, an entire team paid with their lives after a single match. Another time, a referee settled a dispute goal by pulling a gun and shooting the captain. One player couldn't even make it off the pitch before he was beaten to death by an opponent. Other players survived the final whistle, only to be hunted down by fans who decided a goal, or the lack of one, was simply unforgivable. And then, there's what Kim Jong-un did to North Korea's 2010 World Cup team. Something very cruel. Something inspired by his grandfather's actions to the 1966 World Cup team. But even the Kims have nothing on Uday Hussein, Saddam's psychopath of a son. He saw what the North Koreans were doing to their players and decided it was baby stuff, so he took it up to 100. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the deadliest goals in football. Everyone knows this one, or at least everyone thinks they do. If you've ever heard a story about football and death in the same sentence, it almost always starts with Andres Escobar in 1994. Andres Escobar was a defender for Colombia's national team, widely respected, deeply religious, known for his calm, almost gentlemanly-like style of play. Back then, Colombia arrived at the 1994 World Cup with massive expectations. They had demolished Argentina 5-0 in qualifying, and some pundits even tipped them as dark horse contenders. Then, on June 22, 1994, something happened, to say the least. Playing against the United States, Escobar attempted to intercept a low cross into the box. Instead, the ball deflected off his leg and rolled past his own goalkeeper. This resulted in an own goal as Colombia lost 2-1 and got eliminated. For Escobar, the mistake was devastating, but by football standards, it should have ended there. However, it in fact had just begun. Back home in Medellin, Colombia was still deep in the throes of narco violence. Days after returning from the World Cup, Escobar went out with friends to a nightclub. He was relaxed, trying to move on from that moment. In the parking lot, an argument broke out. Accounts vary on what exactly was said, but the result is not in dispute, as a man pulled a gun and shot Andres Escobar 6 times. According to multiple witnesses, after each shot, the killer shouted, "Goal." Man. The sad reality is that Escobar was 27 years old. The brutality of that detail is what turned this case into legend. It transformed a football error into a death sentence as if the match had never really ended. Years later, that same fragile boundary between play and death would claim another life, this time on a small amateur field where dreams were young. It was supposed to be just another evening game in Guadalajara. An amateur fixture in the Liga Canan, 7-a-side, synthetic turf, dust rising in the September sun, and a scoreboard that already told half the story. The match was 3-0. Luis Torres' team, known as Viper 3.0, were leading comfortably as his teammates had dreams of going pro someday. Luis was 16, barely more than a boy. Midway through that second half, Luis carried the ball through midfield with another memory to stash away. A rival whiffed a mistimed challenge, and an opposition player named Moises Pulido saw it differently. Pulido was a 25-year-old expert in adult amateur play. What started as an exchange of words turned into something else as Moises landed the first punch. This was followed by a series of horrific punches to take him out completely. Luis fell with eyes rolling back, confusion and shock and pain all crashing into one another, but it didn't stop there. Witnesses later said Pulido kept hitting Luis in the back of the head again and again after he was already down. Soon enough, Luis began to convulse, and the crowd now screamed for help. Paramedics rushed in, but by the time they reached him, the damage was already done. Luis Torres was gone. Meanwhile, Pulido fled, but was found months later and charged with intentional homicide. This wasn't football anymore. It was something far more cruel. And even while Luis Torres' death happened on a small pitch in Guadalajara, football would again become a stage for tragedy, this time in the rolling hills of South Africa. It was a quiet Sunday in the low-lying hills of Northwest Province. The Hartbeesfontein Wallabies were holding on to a 2-1 lead against the Try-Agains. A tight amateur match for sure, with a modest crowd of around 600 people. Nothing on paper that should have ever transitioned into calamity. But then, the goal came. Not the one the Wallabies wanted. It was the one that pulled them back and breathed new life into the opposition's hopes. Before long, supporters were already storming the pitch to protest. They pushed and shoved each other, with so many bodies pushing toward the players and officials. What should have been controlled devolved in mere seconds into something completely unhinged, a mob wrestling for control of what remained of the match. Amid the chaos, 20-year-old Captain Isaac Mkwetha felt the need to do something, so he left the fray in anger and came back with a knife in hand. Maybe to defend his team, maybe to confront what he saw as injustice, maybe because in that moment passion overtook sense. There was no internal clock ticking in his head, no second chance blinking on a scoreboard, just the blade and the referee. Lebagang Petrus Magethi, the 34-year-old referee, was already rattled by the pitch invasion, so he did something almost nobody should ever think possible on a football field. He reached for a licensed 9mm pistol he had given to a friend in the crowd. According to police accounts, when Mkwetha lunged at him with that knife, the referee fired once, striking the young captain in the chest. Mkwetha died shortly afterward in the sterile, cold environment of a police station. And just like that, a match ended with 24 pairs of eyes staring at a lifeless body. There was no way to rewind it or find the replay for the moment, no VAR, nothing. But Mkwetha is not the only victim of the game. Unlike Mkwetha, the next story takes us to a stadium filled with voices, a storm of objects flying through the air, and a man who would leave the pitch alive only to die a victim of mistaken blame. August 2014, in Algeria. JS Kabylie had just lost 2-1 at home. It was a bad, painful result. Fans were furious, and when the players began the long walk off the pitch, the crowd turned into a firing squad. Bottles, stones, anything that could fly. Albert Ibose was a 23-year-old Cameroonian striker and the league's top scorer. He had scored the consolation for JS Kabylie in that very match. He had done his job, but football crowds don't always reward effort. As he headed toward the tunnel, chaos followed him off the pitch. Algerian authorities later claimed that a single projectile, believed to be a stone thrown from the stands, struck Ibose in the back of the head. Witnesses described him collapsing suddenly, as if the power had been cut. He was rushed to the hospital, and for several hours there was hope that he would regain consciousness, but unfortunately, he never did. Albert was pronounced dead later that night from severe head injuries, but this is where the story fractures. When Albert's body was returned to Cameroon, his family commissioned an independent autopsy, one that directly contradicted the Algerian account. According to the family's findings, he did not die from a single projectile at all, but from a brutal beating allegedly sustained inside the stadium tunnel. What makes the story even more disturbing is that no one was ever held accountable. Whether his death was caused by a projectile from the stands or violence behind closed doors, there was no face to remember, no name to chant in outrage. Responsibility dissolved into silence spread across a system that failed him, and a crowd whose rage went unanswered. In the days that followed, Algerian football was completely shut down. Stadiums were closed, matches were suspended. JS Kabylie Stadium was banned indefinitely, and the authorities talked about responsibility, safety, and reform. But talk doesn't rewind time, and it doesn't return a man who should have been boarding a team bus. Ibose died because fans decided that losing was a crime and someone had to pay. That's what makes this worse. But just like this story, there are times the anger doesn't go overboard when the stadium empties. Sometimes it picks a face, a name, and it follows that person out into the dark. Back in Argentina 2014, a lower division match had just turned ugly long before the final whistle. Police struggling to hold lines that never really existed. The kind of chaos that makes everyone nervous but convinces most people the danger ends at the gates. Franco Nieto believed that too. He was a professional defender doing his job in a country where football loyalty can slide quietly into obsession. After the match, he left the stadium area with relatives expecting the same thing players expect everywhere. Instead, the violence was just getting started. A group of rival supporters had followed him since they knew who he was, they knew where he was walking, and when they reached him in the street, they just attacked. This was a sustained beating. However, Franco was struck repeatedly in the head and kicked while down. By the time the attacker scattered, the damage was already irreversible. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition, unconscious, skull fractured, and his body alive, but his future already slipping away. Days later, Franco Nieto died. This unfortunate loss was caused by fan-driven retribution. After Nieto's death, Argentine football reacted the way it often does. They enforced bans, issued statements and promises, and conducted police investigations. While we can conclude this is an unfortunate situation, not all football tragedies are caused by chaos. Sometimes the game is merely a convenient gathering that exposes its players to a far darker reality, the kind that would eventually claim the lives of an entire team near the Venezuela-Colombia border. Up until now, there is one big opinion that these deaths came from passion because what happened to Los Maniceros was a plan. In 2009, near the Venezuela and Colombia border, an amateur football team finished a match with tired legs, jokes, frustration, also relief that it was over. Los Maniceros wasn't famous, so they were peanut sellers. It's literally what the name means. These guys played football because it was the one place that felt simple. Until it wasn't. One day after a match, they were stopped by armed men. The players were kidnapped, forced into vehicles, driven away from the pitch, and into territory where football meant nothing. This was football being used as an excuse to identify, isolate, and erase a group of people in one move. They were taken to a remote area and then executed. 11 players were murdered. Only one man survived, left for dead, wounded but alive, able to tell the world what happened when the others could not. His survival was a mistake, and through that mistake, the truth escaped. Investigators later tied the killings to armed groups operating along the border where kidnappings, disappearances, and executions were tools of control. The match had simply provided a list of names in one place at one time. Meanwhile, every story before this one still had an illusion of spontaneity, a punch thrown, a trigger pulled in panic, or a crowd losing itself. Then there's Los Maniceros, who had none of that. Their deaths were premeditated and well-planned. Los Maniceros showed how far football could drag men into violence when hatred is organized. But what happens when that organization isn't criminal gangs or mobs, but the state itself? This time when a nation decides that losing is a crime, the game becomes a slow sentence and it makes the players its prisoners. In 1966, North Korea shocked the world. They knocked out Italy and got into the World Cup quarterfinals, an achievement no Asian side had ever managed. That performance should have been celebrated forever, but in a country where ideology outweighs sport, anything short of total victory in a tournament can be dangerous. Rumors circulating outside the Hermit Kingdom suggested that some members of that team were relocated to remote regions and forced into harsh labor, banished from the limelight and compelled to toil in conditions far removed from the cheers of Wembley. These accounts are drawn from testimonies of North Korean refugees that revealed the exact fates of many unknown players because they simply disappeared from public view after returning home. Fast forward 44 years to 2010 when North Korea qualified for the World Cup again. Their group stage performance was rough. They lost every match. Lost 2-1 to Brazil, got pummeled 7-0 by Portugal, and lost 3-0 to Ivory Coast. According to reports from observers, when the team returned to Pyongyang, they were subjected to a 6-hour public criticism session in front of government officials, sports students, and journalists. Players were accused of ideological failure for embarrassing the nation. Even more disturbingly, those same reports claimed that the team's head coach, Kim Jong-un, was subsequently sent to a labor camp, a punishment reserved for political dissidents. State media denied any punitive action, and FIFA itself investigated and dismissed claims that players or coaches were punished for those losses, saying team members continued training and no sanctions had been applied. This is wonderful news, but the sources are... how can I put this gently? Kim Jong-un launches a nuclear missile into the Sea of Japan every time the world stops paying attention to him, and FIFA is literally the most corrupt sporting organization that has ever existed period. Defector accounts and South Korean intelligence sources say that in North Korean society, athletes who fail to live up to expectations are at risk of severe consequences, including forced labor, re-education, and exile from the public eye. What makes these allegations terrifying is the idea that an entire national squad could be collectively punished by the state because of poor performance. And some of the forced labor camps in North Korea subject prisoners to starvation, brutality, and unending toil. But North Korea is not the only state that punishes underperforming teams. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, took it 10 steps further. All sporting matters in Saddam's Iraq fell under Uday Hussein, Saddam's firstborn son and chairman of both the Iraqi Olympic Committee and the Iraqi Football Association. But unlike sports officials in other countries, Uday was not interested in training or tactics. He just called the dressing room at halftime and threatened to cut off the legs of the players if they lost. Matches became battles for survival itself. If the national team lost or even drew when Uday expected to win, punishments began. Coaches and players were whipped, forced to kick concrete balls, and made to endure unimaginable humiliations. Sometimes players were forced to bathe in raw sewage while they had open wounds, ensuring infection and slow suffering. The Olympic Committee building in Baghdad, where Uday ran this whole scheme, hid a secret prison. As many as 50 sportsmen and women may have been murdered, and hundreds more tortured, beaten senseless, and left to rot. The methods were horrific, as they used Iron Maiden-style sarcophagi with nails pointing inward, forcing suffocation and puncture. Some footballers survived, though the scars were both physical and psychological. One time, Sardar Haidar was imprisoned after announcing his retirement. Just as he hung the boots, he was beaten and dunked in sewage. But Haidar isn't the only footballer to experience this. Hashim Hassan, Abdul Jabbar, and Katan Shatir were flogged for 3 days after a 4-1 loss to Japan at the 2000 Asian Cup. Abbas Rahim Zair missed a crucial penalty and was blindfolded and promptly taken to a prison camp for 3 weeks. Long-serving Captain Habib Jafar endured multiple incarcerations, forced ladder climbs, sewage baths, and even catching mosquitoes as punishment. The full scope of Uday's terror is impossible to quantify. The regime's secrecy ensured that death, punishment, and survival were all obscured. For the Iraqi national team, football was no longer a game. Every match, every pass, every goal carried the shadow of potential death administered by the hand of a man who treated sport as a weapon. Under Uday Hussein, losing was deadly, and the players who survived carried that horror for the rest of their lives.